A documentary film crew lost at sea and shipwrecked on a mysterious island full of monsters and intrigue. A billionaire who knows more than it seems, and his bodyguards struggling to keep him alive. An evil lurking in the jungle, stalking them in a deadly game. This is Point Nemo. Point Nemo is a one-shot sci-fi survival RPG launching Tuesday, November 2nd on Kickstarter. This is the second adventure written for the 3-2-1 action RPG rule set and is loaded with cool playable characters, crazy charts, malicious monsters, and wild weapons. This full-length adventure can be played over the course of one night or broken up into individual episodes and features several fun side quests and interesting island destinations. So if you're ready to rumble in the jungle, be sure to join us for some action, November 2nd on Kickstarter.
This is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the founder and publisher of Unwinnable. He said today we were going to talk about fighting fantasy, and I said, Stu, that sounds pretty broad, because isn't that all fantasy? Stu Horvath.
Hi, Hambone.
How's it going, man?
Pretty good, hanging in there.
Pretty cool. Like, we are going to talk about fighting fantasy today, and also at the end of the episode, my old buddy Ryan Verniere is going to pop on for a wee chat about Blackbirds. But first, Stu, let's get to the meat of the episode. Talk about fighting fantasy.
Okay, so right around the same time as Dungeons & Dragons was creating the tabletop role-playing as we know it, Choose Your Own Adventure came out, just like right in the same couple of years. It established this idea of sort of forking paths narrative novels, right? You've played a Choose Your Own Adventure, right?
I love them so much.
Choose Your Own Adventure is very much the American version of the forking paths narrative interactive fiction kind of thing. It's all narrative. So like you get to a decision in the plot and you make the choice and you suffer the consequences, good or bad, by flipping to the indicated section, right?
Right.
There's no mechanical aspect to these books. They're really just books that are interactive. What we call the British or European take on this spins out of Tunnels and Trolls. So Tunnels and Trolls was a role-playing game. We've talked about it on the podcast before. It's like the second role-playing game. It comes out the next year after D&D, and it focuses on solo play. The passages of the story are all numbered and arranged randomly. So you kind of flip back and forth as the text indicates. But the wrinkle is that it's not just you making narrative decisions. It's also incorporating combat and spell casting. So your character can die in the middle of the story. And the idea here was to kind of like give you a little bit of the experience of a group tabletop session, without having to put together a group, which is often for most people cited as the most difficult part of tabletop role playing, is getting the group together to play.
Always a little harder than it looks.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tunnels and Trolls is, publishing these things as, 8.5 by 11 kind of module size books. Fighting fantasy is the first series of adventure game books, is what we kind of call these as a subgenre, to be in book form. And they come out in England primarily through Penguin Books, and they're written by Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. Now, this is a little confusing because this is not Steve Jackson of GURPS. I only learned this a couple years ago and it blew my mind. There's two Steve Jacksons in role-playing games, and they're both really important, but for different reasons. Steve Jackson Games in Austin, Texas, does GURPS, does Melee, and the whole fantasy trip thing. Steve Jackson, along with Ian Livingstone and some other gentlemen in England, found Games Workshop, which is like Warhammer. So completely different kind of things. Same name, really confusing. To make matters even worse, the Austin Steve Jackson did write a couple fighting fantasy books.
What?
Which ones? I don't know, because these got the same name. Yeah, no, it's super crazy.
I mean, how do you really differentiate that? I mean, I guess there has got to be like a very stark contrast in writing styles from like an American from Texas versus someone in the UK. So maybe that would be the giveaway. But, just looking at the cover, how would you know?
You wouldn't. And I mean, like, I'm sure it's in the bio if there is a bio, but like a lot of the authorial quirks are kind of erased in the editing process. Like they all kind of read the same. You can kind of tell the difference between a British Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone style because of the way they construct their stories, their games. You kind of intuit that over like the course of like a huge body of work. Like they each wrote like a million of these things. So like you can kind of see like, oh, all of these Ian Livingstone games are structured the same way. I bet that like when they write together, you can kind of tell who wrote what. And we'll get to that in a second. But Fighting Fantasy, they're book length. One of the cool things is that Games Workshop existed at this point. So they insisted on using Games Workshop artists to do the covers and do the interior illustrations. So a lot of the early covers are by Ian Miller. The illustrations are by our friend Russ Nicholson. So right there, you get a lot of the tone of, you know, this is dark and gritty and like dangerous, right? Russ Nicholson just makes the horrible monsters and just does gore so well.
Oh, I know.
So like, you know that these books are going to kind of push that envelope, but they do. They're accompanied by kind of like a light role-playing system that actually becomes a standalone RPG system later on called Advanced Fighting Fantasy, which forms the basis of the indie RPG. Our contemporary is called Troika, is derived from the Advanced Fighting Fantasy system. But anyway, so Fighting Fantasy becomes like the foundation of this idea. Like, yeah, it starts with Tunnels and Trolls, but really Fighting Fantasy popularizes it and makes it something that like British writers go nuts for. The British RPG market, just there weren't a lot of RPGs. So like with the British writers and creators cranking out these adventure game books, Dave Morris is another prolific writer of, he does the Golden Dragon game books, Dragon Warriors, a whole bunch of other stuff. Like they fill the market with these solo games and it becomes a really popular form. To this day in England, there's not a huge amount. Grail Quest is another huge one in England. But in America, there isn't a huge amount of them. A lot of what we got in America were imported, and it was part of the larger kind of choose your own adventure fad in the States. Most famous here is Lone Wolf, and I'm pretty sure Lone Wolf is even British in origin. I think Joe Deaver's an Englishman. But the idea here is that you have inventory, you have spells you have to manage. Combat is a thing. You could very easily die. The first Fighting Fantasy book is called The Warlock of Firetop. It comes out in 1982. It's really famous. Russ Nicholson does all the art. And as I said, you know, they launched this series of books, and there's like 50 of them. And the first one is co-written by British Steve Jackson and Ian Livingstone. Livingstone's parts are much more linear seeming and trap filled. There's like usually a very much a right way to do it and a wrong way to go through it. Whereas Steve Jackson sort of excels in non-linear spaces where you can kind of like, his part is sort of a labyrinth. So like you can kind of go around the same places looking for different paths through similar areas. And there's usually not necessarily a right way or a wrong way. So those two kind of styles bolt together kind of pleasingly in Warlock of Firetop Mountain. But then later in the series, you could get like Steve Jackson game books that are like very much like non-linear sort of exploratory atmospheric books. And then you get Ian Livingstone ones, which are sort of like sliding down these different chutes. They're similar experiences, but they're different at the same time. I tend to prefer Steve Jackson's stuff. His Sorcery series that is sort of like a corollary to Fighting Fantasy is a 4-part thing with an additional magic grimoire where you kind of like, you have spells that you have to memorize personally to use them in the game.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's such a good gimmick. It's a 4-volume thing. And those are like some of the best ever written in my estimation. They're just so good. The last one, Crown of Kings, I think is called. They're so good. They're so good. You should definitely try and check out Sorcery if you get a chance. Warlock on Firetop Mountain is great. There's so many Fighting Fantasy books. Most of them are in a shared world. There were a couple novels, but a couple of them also, there's a couple modern day ones and a couple like sci-fi ones. All cool, all worth your time. Of course, try and find the ones that Russ Nicholson illustrated. Oh, funny thing about Warlock of Firetop Mountain, Russ Nicholson is a gnarly artist, man. And there's this one illustration of a ghoul where his face is basically fallen off and full of worms. And like people were really upset about it because these books were really geared towards kids. And like they were just like, that's not appropriate. And like I usually am just like, oh, whatever.
Yeah.
I kind of think that that one's not really appropriate for kids.
Man, I'll tell you, I love choose your own adventure style books. And like every time you say Russ Nicholson, I get smiles from Miles. Like I'm like thinking about the art and it makes me like so happy. He's one of my favorite D&D artists in general. I love Russ Nicholson, but man, like he is an gnarly artist. So, you know, when I think about choose your own adventure and you think about like the American choose your own adventure books and like the art on there is cool, sometimes a little edgy, but like really kind of like almost light and fluffy. Like to me, it gives off like an Escape from Witch Mountain vibe.
Yeah,
you know?
totally.
However, when you look at Russ Nicholson's art on a book that is geared for children, you don't feel like you're going to escape Witch Mountain. You know, you might die there. It's probably more likely than not going to happen.
So one of my favorite adventure game books is The Eye of the Dragon. It's a Dave Morris book, part of the Golden Dragon series. In England, they look like adventure game books with like D&D style art on the cover and whatever. In the States, though, they have D&D style art, but the protagonist is always like a 10-year-old boy with a sword. And he's not like dressed. Well, I guess in Eye of the Dragon, he is. He's in like a toga, but the toga is like obviously over like his corduroys and his, keds. And he's got like a sword or a magic staff or something, and he's fighting a monster. Yeah, like that escape, like Disney Afternoon Special kind of vibe. But then Russ Nicholson does the art inside, and there's no children around. Your protagonist isn't a child, and like one of the pictures in that book is like this giant crocodile man, like covered in gore. He has eaten so many people, and you know it just by glancing at this picture. But there's this like dopey kid on the front cover, and it's like, what is going on here?
Yeah, I mean, like you look at choose your own adventure art, and again, I'm not knocking choose your own adventure art. I love it so much. However, you're not in any danger. But like in fighting fantasy, you're definitely in over your head.
Oh yeah,
looking at Russ Nicholson's art.
The underlying thing with fighting fantasy is that they do feel dangerous because your character could legitimately die in the middle of the story. And I think that's like sort of like a wild boundary pushing thing. I generally take the position that anytime a parent is like, this is a dangerous piece of media for my kids, I'm generally of the opinion that they are incorrect. Like the kids are going to be fine. The kids are all right. But I do understand why people were so uncomfortable with this idea of fighting. Like you don't read like, I don't know, Pride and Prejudice. I mean, I guess maybe now in the days of like Game of Thrones, you do worry about the protagonist getting their head chopped off, but it's not your fault, I guess is the thing.
That makes sense.
I didn't kill that character. The writer did. There's a culpability, I think, that might have freaked parents out at the time. And there was like a little bit of a panic surrounding fighting fantasy. It wasn't quite like the satanic panic levels, because it's sort of like in England, it was a little bit more tied to like piety, I think.
Right. And
what's appropriate for children and these like notions of childhood, and probably class issues and stuff too. That's always a big thing in England, right?
Yeah.
There was a little bit of a cloud, just like D&D, that just made these things even more popular. Like people go nuts for fighting fantasy over there, like we do for early D&D, because they had that was their early D&D. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Oh dude. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm just smiling over here because both sides of this makes me smile in a lot of different ways. Yeah. Like, cause nothing satanic panic-ish about like choose your own adventure. Like mom would be totally cool with me reading that after church, like NBD. It's a book, and you got it at like a regular store. But man, I kind of, looking back, I wish that I had gotten into Final Fantasy when I was younger. I definitely think that not that things would be different. I don't regret anything, but I know that like I would have enjoyed certain things so much more had I had like that as like the first step towards, the things that I'm into now, because 42, I got a lot going on. It's hard to just kind of go back and read everything that you want to read. Like, eventually, you have the Burgess Meredith moment. You're like, oh, the whole time in the world. But I think this is a pretty cool thing. And I think that the idea of it in general is dope. And the idea of having to do more than just like turn the pages and know you're not going to die is a pretty cool aspect of it too. I'm probably going to go try to find some on Noble Night once we get off this Zoom recording.
You should. They're tough to come by in the States, because I'm like 95% sure that there was never really an exhaustive American reprint program. It's Penguin, but through Puffin Books, and you can get them in Canada. I went on a trip to Toronto when I was a kid and went to the world's biggest bookstore, RIP. And like they had a wall of these things, and it was just like my brain exploded all over that place. And I came back with a stack of them, but I could never find them as a kid. Like I had to settle for Grail Quest, which is great. Lone Wolf, I just looked him up. Joe Deaver is Brit. So we really don't have any homegrown in the 80s adventure game book writers. They were all imported. But I don't recall Fighting Fantasy. So they are a little hard to come by, which makes them a little expensive, a little more than I really want to pay for them. Because you got to pay, almost always got to pay like international shipping from Canada or the UK. And that sucks.
Yeah, I found it on Noble Knight.
Oh, well, there you go. They got everything there.
Yeah, as you're talking about it, and like, listen, dear listener, it happens to me too. Blame Stu. I'm in the middle of recording an episode, and I pulled out my phone and I went to nobleknight.com and I just ordered the Warlock of Firetop Mountain. Damn it.
Good. I have like a nostalgia factor for the Green Spine 80s copies, but like these things have been reprinted a lot in the UK, so you can get more modern versions that are less expensive.
Oh yeah, I mean, I paid $13.50. It's from like 2002.
Yeah. The only thing you got to watch out for is I hope that it's got the Russ Nicholson artwork inside. One of the later editions has gotten rid of the Russ Nicholson artwork, and it's just like, why would you do that? That's stupid.
Yeah, it's kind of dumb.
Yeah.
Now I'm going back in and I'm Googling some stuff here.
Well, there you go.
Anyway, Stu, do you have any final thoughts on Fighting Fantasy?
One more, and it's just like if anybody's played these books before, you know the thing where like you make the decision, but you keep your finger in the in the spot where you make the decision to make sure that you could like find your place. If you die, you just go back, like save scumming like an XCOM game, except like in paper. I love doing that. That's like one of my favorite things in the world. I never played one of these things honest ever.
Hey, listen, I've always felt that if it's a finger and not a bookmark, it's not cheating.
Exactly. Oh, real quick, one more thing. And it's a cool design thing that I think that gets overlooked. The idea behind a lot of the Fighting Fantasy books isn't so much like getting through to the end and winning, which you can do, or just finding all the awesome ways to die, because there's lots of them. The actual point of these things is to find the optimal path from the beginning to end. It's like there's all these different narratives that you can have, but they are almost all designed to have one specific optimal path to kind of thread your way through that gets you like the best possible story. And finding that is sort of the real challenge of the book. So like they are meant to be played multiple times, so you get different experiences each time, which I think is super cool.
That is definitely something super cool. And so that I wasn't really used to choose your own adventure book. So listen, I'm going to continue to Google this to make sure I bought the right one. I will be very excited once I know which one I'm getting. But in the meantime, I'm hanging out with an old friend tonight. Ryan Verniere is here. He is one of my old neighbors from the Garden State of New Jersey, now living out on the West Coast. And you are here tonight to talk about the BackerKit for your RPG Blackbirds.
That's right. Hey, man, thanks for having me here. It's a real pleasure. I'm a fan of the show, obviously, and it's just been great reconnecting with you over the last couple of years and being able to hang out and talk about dice.
Hell yeah, man. And it's also cool, too, because, with everything being as it is, I didn't get to run into you during the normal holiday season. So
yeah.
It's good to be able to catch up any way we can.
Yeah, I mean, for the listeners who don't know at home, I usually go back to the motherland to collect a fistful of soil to put beneath my coffin out in LA so I can slumber successfully. I have to go back all the way to, Clifton, New Jersey.
Yeah, I mean, coffin soil and ruts rippers. How have you been going so long without a ripper?
It's not easy, so I mean, a deep fried hot dog is a very special thing. I have not encountered any on the West Coast. And I struggle, but the ripper and ruts, that's what this episode is now going to be about, has been a great razor for sort of deciding if somebody is going to be cool to hang out with in LA, because it's such a fake town filled with cliches. But if you meet someone, they're like, oh, I'm from New Jersey. It's like, oh, what part? Oh, I'm from North Jersey or whatever. And it's like, did you go to Ruts? And they're like, yes. And then I'm like, all right, we're best friends now, so it's fine.
Yeah, but if they say the hot grill, screw them.
Yeah, sometimes they talk about the other one that was on Anthony Bourdain. It's up by the GW. I forget. But anyway, I'm like, no, that's not the place. It's Ruts. Ruts was open first.
Ruts or death. That's what I say. So Blackbirds,
Talk to me a little bit about that, because this is something new and it's something cool. And this is your own world that you've built and you've been building for a very long time. Why don't you talk to the listeners a little bit about the inspiration behind it? Because this is something I think is so cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is one of my favorite questions in general. When people look at tabletop RPGs and they're like, what does it mean to be playing Blackbirds in an ocean of D&D or other games that are sort of like, sword and board fantasy? And the answer is definitely, found within those inspirations. And so the easiest way is like, Blackbirds is horror fantasy. It is a horror fantasy property, meaning that where D&D sort of vectors towards high fantasy and, heroic acts and irreverent sort of fun, we're more of a Shakespearean, dramatic, arguably gothic sort of tone as a counterpoint to all of that. And I think because, there's many flavors of fantasy, and I was like, what is being underserved right now? And I just was not seeing the eldritch in the fantasy space. And that's not to sling mud or to be judgmental. It was just like, where is the, White Wolf version of D&D? That was sort of the mental exercise that brought me towards Blackbirds. Also, one of the most influential books in my life is the manga Berserk, right? And I encountered Berserk, I think it was like 1982 in Forbidden Planet Comics in Manhattan, not far from where we grew up. And it just blew my mind, seeing sort of eldritch beasts being fought, against this sort of classic fighter archetype. And, I didn't understand the themes of the book at the time, but as I grew older, the book also was growing in a way and sort of, led me to this like deep fascination to cathartic storytelling, the likes of which, Miura, rest in peace, sort of was able to achieve almost perfectly throughout the Golden Age arc of Berserk. But not only just Berserk, which is obviously influenced by a number of other things, clearly one of those things being sort of Lovecraft, right, and the mythos. And obviously Lovecraft is a problematic figure of his time, and we're all, I think painfully aware of all that stuff and should be. But the idea of the cosmic horror, I knew what that looked like, at least in the 1920s, 30s, what have you, from reading all of, Lovecraft's works and playing Call of Cthulhu a great deal. But I was like, what would that look like in a world of fantasy, a world of arguably lower fantasy than D&D, right? And so all of those things started to mix around. And with the advent of Dark Souls and its various incarnations, and especially on the eve of Elden Ring, holy crap, my life is going to be destroyed when that game drops. I just was like, what's happening? Why are we not looking at these aesthetics? Why are we not looking at these themes? And I know that there are many arguments, about, what people enjoy and prefer in games and how they want to spend their time with their friends, telling a collaborative story. But I was like, that's where I want to go. And so Blackbirds was born out of that smoldering mist of darkness I just described.
See, that's pretty cool, because as I was seeing the artwork coming out of it, it wasn't so much Dark Souls for me, which I did see and I completely understand the comparison of. As it was unfolding, that's what everyone was gravitating to. Man, I saw Berserk. And I got excited because, having watched the cartoon, and dear listener, if you have not watched Berserk, the first season is a masterpiece. It gets a little weird at the end, and there's definitely some uncomfortable themes in like the last couple episodes once you get towards the end of the storyline. But as far as fantasy goes, as far as the fantasy that I know we're going to experience in Blackbirds, it's really unlike anything you've ever seen. And also, it's brutal in another way because, Ryan, I know you remember the theme song from Pen Pals for the first season.
Yeah.
And after, you're coming out with Blackbirds, it's like, man, I need to go rewatch Berserk. So I started rewatching Berserk, and I was like, man, I wonder if I can download that song. And so, I tried to legally go and download it through iTunes.
What a gentleman.
I know. I tried to pay like the dollar for it, and it kept rerouting me to all these different stores. And eventually I ended up in I think it was iTunes Japan at one point. And so I hit the button to buy it, and it switched my Apple ID over to Japanese iTunes, Japanese App Store. So I had 3 weeks where I couldn't do a lot of stuff on my phone. And this is how brutal it was. I get through this whole thing. I'm talking to different people on Apple, different chats, different emails, all this stuff. finally get to a point where there's this one thing you need to do, but you really can't do it. And we can't do anything either. And I said to the woman who was in the customer service, I said, listen, you're Apple. You can do anything you want. And she says, no, it's not really like that. I go, no. I don't know if you recall that U2 album that you managed to put on everybody's iPhone. So if you could give that U2 album that nobody wanted and asked for to literally everybody in the world, you could switch my thing back. Dude, 10 minutes later, I'm back.
Nice.
But that's how brutal Berserk is. Even the theme song will get you heat with somebody.
And so we're talking about dun 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 dun, that opening.
That's it.
All right. Okay. Yeah. So that song is one of the most wonderful and horrible tunes of all time. Like, it's of an era, right? Like very 90s, very sort of an homage to the grunge rock movement that's happening in the West. And I love it. Like, I mean, when I first heard it, I was a little thrown off because I'm like, what's happening here? But then you're on episode 5 and you're like singing along.
It's an earworm for sure.
It's a super duper earworm, which is totally hilarious. But yeah, so I think we're talking specifically about the 90s anime. And yeah, Berserk is a huge influence. So here's the thing, right? Like when we talk about the inspiration, Berserk is the kernel influence, right? But Dark Souls is hugely influenced by Berserk. So we're all sort of on the same weird branch of this gnarled tree of darkness. And so you don't get Dark Souls without Berserk, and you don't get Blackbirds without Berserk. So if you were to trace backwards from these products, it would be Blackbirds, Berserk, Hieronymus Bosch. Like you could follow this, through like art history and creativity, as you should. I mean, I think when you're going to set out to make something, you should be able to cite your inspirations and not just replicate them, but be inspired by them.
Well, on that note, executing something in the vein of a Berserk or a Dark Soul comes to require a special kind of rule set. Now, with most TTRPGs these days, they're all moving towards really rules light systems. What led you to go a little more crunchy with the rules?
I like the rules light movement. I just backed Mothership, right? The box set on Kickstarter. I threw some money at that. I'm so excited to play. But I also kind of previously, I backed this game Lancer. And Lancer just looked like madness. Like it looked like incredibly complex madness and building your mechs. And I was like, wow, this is like a really cool game. And there's an appetite for this level of crunch out there. I'm like, maybe I should just lean in to what I know and what I love. And what I love is I love a game where I can dive in very deep in the creation of my character, and I can sort of have this really bespoke thing, but the actual expression of gameplay is fairly simple. So it's a little bit of having your cake and eating it too. Also, I wanted to do something a little bit different. I mean, we saw 5e hit in a huge way, and I'm excited for that wave and impact it's had, because it benefits all of us, right? This rising tide lifts all ships in the TTRPG community. I know that might trigger some people. I'm sorry, but it's true, right? Like what's the good of a telephone if someone else down the street doesn't have one? It's useless, right? And so with everybody being, exposed to RPGs, there's just a bigger market for people who are also, tiny indies. So, just looking at this, I was like, look, there's room for the prog rock album of TTRPGs. And I was like, so I'm going to just make the King Crimson, Crimson King, version of the RPG, because it's just not being served right there in the space. There is no like right or wrong in TTRPG. There is simply the choice you're making. And I know some people will be like, well, I'm a market analysis and you should, be using a system that has a D20. And I'm like, but yeah, sure, whatever. But people, I think, respond more to passion and a vision and a level of render and craftsmanship and thought to a thing than they do to someone just trying to clone and look like, something else. Like how many World of Warcraft MMO clones came out in the wake of WoW's success, only to die in less than a year, right? And so for me, it's like, don't be Dungeons and Dragons, be a different flavor, be something alternative, not in a hostile way, in an artistic way. And so, crunch, I mean, we're not talking about like, the old ICE system, like Rollmaster. So there's some addition, subtraction, and I guess very light algebra in the sense that, sometimes there's an equation like if you are rank 3 in this, then you add, this value to damage. But it's all very simple stuff, We don't ask people to go crazy and perform trigonometry. The crunch more has to do with optionality. Like a character in D&D, for example, is a series of stats. We're a series of stats. And then they, as they progress through levels, they pick, feats or various class powers, right? We do things a little bit differently, where as you progress through the tiers of play, you get to sort of buy talents and techniques, which are sort of like feats, and you can slot them like cards at a playing table. They aren't literally cards, and the game is not a card game. Everything is resolved with dice. Imagine if you didn't have to pick one of the thief feats, but instead you could pick all three, and you just can only slot one at a time, being, once per session or once per a rekindling phase, which is sort of our version of like a long rest. And so it's just like we open the door to optionality. I like spoiling people for choice. I know that there's an issue with like people being paralyzed by choice, but I'd rather err on the side of you can do more with your character than less. Because isn't it just the worst when you hit level 3, you pick a thing and you're like, I didn't want to be a rogue assassin. I wanted to be a burglar. And now that choice is made. Reasonable dungeon masters will let you undo that choice, but I think it's a suboptimal sort of design. So our crunch is more about options than it is about mathematics.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think that's really impressive that you have it built more like a skill tree that you're only going to hang from one branch of at a time, versus you pick the one thing and then 3 levels later, you're like, oh, crap, I went completely in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that will never occur. I mean, the only thing that we designed for is that you can't, during one Blackbird's arc or their lifespan or whatever the story you're telling with your friends happens to be, you won't be able to acquire all of the talents and traits for, let's say, a shadow and subterfuge character or an odd and ritual character. So and that's by design. That way, when the next time you play the game or you make a new character and you're like, oh, I really liked the charm and manipulation path, it will feel a bit different. And then obviously as we create more supplements and supporting materials, we'll get to a point where there's like tons of talents and techniques, and they're all very cinematic. I think a lot of games, when you choose a talent or technique, it's like, here's your +1 in this weird bespoke thing. And specifically, we didn't want to do that. We wanted these talents and techniques to feel very cinematic. Even though there are rules attached to them, we wanted them to be sort of moody. I wanted there to be sort of like narrative texture to them. And because the game is very filmic or cinematic, many of our talents and techniques have these like really cool powers called extinguish abilities. Here's a very simple example. Let's say that your bow and blade character, sort of a fighter type, is being accosted by that huge brute in the tavern who's swilling too much ale and abusing the bar staff and just being a complete piece of shit. And your fate weaver, which is what we call a GM, is just telegraphing that this guy is bad news. And you want to have that moment that happens in every film, be it John Wick or what have you, where your character, tier 1, effectively level 1, can stroll up to that character and like poke them in the chest, exchange some words. And where in most games a fight would just instantly ensue and it's initiative and it's 90 rounds of combat or whatever, you can actually just use your extinguish power, let's say for your longsword technique, and insta-kill this dude, right? And, it resets the card, it takes it off of your character for a brief period of time. You can get it back during the rekindling phase, but it just lets you have that cinematic moment where it's a part of the rule system. It's not just make-believe. We're not just like speaking words at one another. We have this great system that lets you sort of take over the narrative briefly in ways that I think other games don't, unless they are specifically story narrative games that are out there. And I'm super fond of this system because I think there are a lot of GMs out there who I don't think award their players with enough cinematic moments and powers. They just sort of drive them in a direction and they're like, well, you didn't roll a natural 20, so we're not doing X, Y, or Z. So we decided to build in big critical moments into the powers themselves.
Well, yeah, I mean, what you're describing is that moment in the cantina where suddenly Obi-Wan whips out the lightsaber, rips that dude's arm off, and here we are. And you really can't do that in a traditional RPG, right? You're always kind of up against the wall, because if you are trying to do something like that, you have to go through a whole combat where it really doesn't need to be. It could just be that moment that will maybe lead to something else. But now you've got this dude's arm on the floor and people are screaming and you're like, yeah, I did that.
Yeah, that was your moment. You didn't have to roll the dice. You were like, I am Obi-Wan. I am John Wick. I am whoever that fantasy in your head is. Like, I can do the thing. And not all extinguished powers are about violence. My favorites happen to be because I'm a basic, dude in a lot of ways. But like, we made sure to build like really, really cool cinematic moments that aren't just like kill a dude. Although there's a lot of that. Like I said, there's like ones that are associated with odd and ritual that, are basically like auto casting a very powerful spell and having it sort of go exactly in the way that you want it to go without having to roll the dice. And the cost, again, is that technique is extinguished. It's exhausted. And so the cool thing about those techniques is that they actually have more than just the extinguish ability on them. They have two sort of like sub abilities, which you can use all the time. And so when you choose to do one of these big filmic things, you lose access temporarily to those two other like perks to your character. And that's a way we sort of balance them out. And as the characters move through the tiers, you eventually will have like a pretty significant hand of these cards. Of course, you can just write them on an index card or on your character sheet. And you'll have like a bunch of opportunities to do multiple extinguish techniques throughout, one session or one weaving of Blackbirds.
Well, very cool. So you are here to promote the BackerKit for Blackbirds. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
So the BackerKit is live right now. It's going to be up until December 1st. So there's still opportunity to basically pre-order and pledge the cool products that we have launched during the Kickstarter, which was very successful. I'm still in shock and, really excited about how well things went. And so the opportunity hasn't been lost for those of you who might have been on the fence or waiting to see like more about the product or just, for whatever reasons couldn't get involved during that 30-day run. There's another cool opportunity to get involved. So yeah, like we'll be sure to, share that link, I'm sure, here via the Hambone's magical list of social media powers.
I'll put it out there. And it'll also be in the show notes of this episode, folks. So if you are hanging out and you are reading the show notes, you'll have the link there. You'll find it on all my social media pages. There'll be swipe ups. There'll be carrier pigeons, whatever I got to do to help get the message out. I'm going to help get the message out for Blackbirds. So why don't you tell our listeners about the perks with the BackerKit?
The biggest perk is that there are some products that are up on the BackerKit that won't be made available again in the future in this format. The Servant of the Gods edition of the book, which is this giant black grimoire, beautifully designed by one of the art directors at AMU, including our own art directors on the Blackbirds team. It's just this perfect amalgamation of darkness and beauty, which is sort of what Blackbirds is about. It's like, we're like the pretty goth kid in a lot of ways. So the Servants of the Gods edition of the book, if it ever is actually reconstructed, it will definitely not be reconstructed in this way. It won't even be just like a colorway shift. This is the only time that this version of that sort of book is going to exist. And then there's some other kind of like, less expensive, cool things like the campaign coins, fate tokens, and fate amulet and armor degradation sort of tokens, all tied to sort of like one of our big meta powers, in the game, which is that a Blackbird is not just some, rando walking down the street. This is somebody who, now that fate is no longer governed or sort of controlled in this Calvinistic sort of way, you have been splashed with the fate stuff and you are on a path that might have been previously, destined for someone like Alexander the Great or somebody whose path was sort of, predestined. That energy, that potential is now in the hands of you, who, is obviously anyone the player dreams up. And so we made these beautiful sort of campaign coins to sort of help you track your fate and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's a great opportunity to get all that special edition goodness before it's gone forever.
Well, that's very cool. BackerKit will be rocking and rolling all the way till December 1st. This has been amazing hanging out and chatting with you. It's so nice to catch up. Since I probably won't see you this holiday season, I'm looking forward to catching you on the road sometime in 2022.
You might be surprised. There might be a Ruts trip in our future. Fingers crossed.
Well, keep me posted. I'm a pretty easy guy to track down these days. So this was another amazing episode of the Vintage RPG Podcast. Stu, where can the people find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, where I actually already posted a whole bunch of Russ Nicholson's Fighting Fantasy book illustrations. There's also novels that he did illustrations for, Trolltooth Wars. You should check that out. That's also on the feed. Find them.
Yeah. Anything that Russ Nicholson does, just buy it.
He's so
I
good.
like it. You can find me on the Twitter and on Instagram at John McGuire RPG. I'm posting more because, hey, I'm actually going out and doing things, and I've got an RPG to promote. You could check out 3-2-1 Action right now on Kickstarter. We are in our last week, and we are promoting Point Nemo, which is a new adventure for 3-2-1 Action. If you want to get a copy of Rocket to Russia, you can boogie on down to our friends over at Exalted Funeral. They got some copies that are definitely not stored in my basement in their shop. You could also check out our Patreon, patreon.com/vintagerpg. We've got early release episodes. We've got a behind the scenes look at Stu's book, still tentatively titled Experience Points. We got a behind the scenes look at my RPG 3-2-1 Action. We got some videos. We got some other cool stuff. We got a killer Discord community that we'd love for you to be a part of. Patreon.com/vintagerpg. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe because your reviews really do help other listeners to find us. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.